Welcome everyone to our webinar on life after the pandemic, facing the new normal. Today's discussion is on the post-ECQ agenda and platforms on labor, work, and wages. With more than 13,000 cases and 68 days in lockdown, the COVID-19 crisis in the Philippines is proving to be more than a health crisis. It's become an economic and political crisis as well. The pandemic proved fatal not only to Filipinos, but also to small and medium enterprises, industries such as tourism, and also the informal sector. This afternoon, our panel of speakers, our speaker, our reactors, and at the same time, our participants here, we will be seeking the answers on important questions such as what is the situation of the labor sector amid this pandemic, and what policies should national and local governments enforce, not only to mitigate risks amidst the new normal from when we begin operations again, but also to radically shift to an equitable system after this pandemic. We are fortunate to have Dr. Rene Ofreneo, Professor Emeritus of the University of the Philippines School of Labor and Industrial Relations. And as reactor, we also have Mr. CJ Castillo, the Senior Researcher of the Labor Education and Research Network, or LEARN. This webinar will go on until 3 in the afternoon. Dr. Rene will show a presentation and will have a set of questions afterwards, but feel free to drop your questions as well on the topic on the Q&A box below. And for those who are just joining us, we also have subtitles available if you need translation. There's a closed caption button right. Okay, so we now give the floor to Dr. Rene Ofreneo on his presentation on the situation of labor, work, and wages amidst this pandemic.
Okay. Thank you, Justin, and isang maalab na araw sa mga kasama. Ngayon din kay CJ na matagal nang hindi ko nakikita. Let me start with a small grievance. Nakalimutan ako padalhan ni Arnold ng invitation sa Zoom. Yeah, ngayon lang yung natagalan akong magbukas. Anyway, ito pong topic natin ay napakalawak and there are many issues that can be discussed. But I'll be focusing more on the implications nitong COVID sa ating trade union movement. I have a very short PowerPoint presentation kalang medyo malawak ang generalization. Okay, let me start. May pag-asa pa ang trade union movement sa panahon ng COVID? Slide, please. Well, just a summary. Here, or noong January, bago magpumutok yung issue ng COVID, ang mundo ay talagang naguguluhan. So, the business community and sa mga SR managers, sa mga CEOs, dahil sa mga global competition, etc., sabi nilang gulo pala ng daigdig. And they call it, it's a VUCA word. It came from a US military jargon pero inadapt ng business. Sabi nila ang daigdig is vulnerable, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Pero tayo sa trade union at sa mga NGOs, ang description natin is more specific. It is a UUP word. U, unequal. Another U, unsustainable. And P, yung paborito ng trade union movement na salita, precarious. And you see, precarious ang environment, precarious ang labor market, ang situation ng mga manggagawa. And then, ang economy is also precarious. So I think it's a better description. Next slide. Okay. But today, pumasok ang COVID. Dito ho, sinasabi ko na mali yung gumamit ng term na post-COVID sapagkat hindi pa naman nakakaahon ang mundo at ang Pilipinas lalo na sa tinatawag na pandemic. At dahil hindi nakakaahon at maraming mga unpredictable na mangyayari, ang mangyayari po, itong taon na ito, yung 2021 and even up to 2022, these are years of living dangerously sa daigdig at maging sa ating bansa, especially for working people. I think nagbabasa naman kayo, lahat naman ng mga forecast, mukhang ang flattening ng pandemic globally baka sa 2022, assuming na may vaccine na madedevelop sila. Well, this year or next year, pero it takes time to produce it on a large scale and an affordable price. We know na yung sa HIV/AIDS, hanggang ngayon wala pang reliable na vaccine. At itong pandemic na ito malawakan. At nakita rin natin, countries can experience waves of infection, reinfection. So nakita natin na Singapore noong March, ang yabang-yabang ng Singapore, na-control nila ang COVID. Pero noong April, biglang dumagsa, nalampasan nila ang lahat ng ASEAN countries, including the Philippines. I think they have now more than 20,000 sapagkat nakalimutan nilang tingnan ang kalagayan ng mga migrant workers. Yung mga Bangladeshi, yung mga Nepalese, others 10 to 12 in a room sa mga dormitory nila. Kuminsan daw 20 in a room. So it was a monster. And then tayo sa Pilipinas, may mga napakahina ng mass testing. At tapos hanggang ngayon wala tayong mass testing. Actually, hindi mo alam kung anong ginagawa nitong si Duque. And then, yung results pa sa test, umaabot ng 10 to 14 days. So may mga OFWs na may COVID, tumakas. So hindi ko alam kung ano mga epekto nito. So yun po ang isang gan. So watch out for the second wave. It can be small, but it can also be a giant wave. So ang tawag ni baka magkaroon ng monster wave. Anyway, we have 3 years. So, ibig sabihin ko, pagdating sa economy at labor market, hindi talaga maiiwasan na dapat mag-adjust ang gobyerno at ang buong lipunan at sana kasama ang trade union movement. Una, ang ating global economy is now in deep recession. Itong mga taga-NEDA, sinasabing wala pang kinakalan 2 quarters pa, etc. bago mag-pronounce na recession. Yung IMF chief economist na nagsabi na napakalalim ng recession and is comparable doon sa Great Depression of 1930s. Sa Amerika, sabi ng aking partner dito sa bahay, mahigit sa 2 milyong manggagawa nag-a-apply ng trabaho. So, every day. So, ganun katindi ngayon ang krisis. Sa Pilipinas, if I may jump, sabi nila 4 na milyon ang talagang naapektuhan. But remember, there are existing number of jobless. CJ can correct me. Sabagat ito pinag-aaralan niya. If I remember it, we have a stock of 3 million plus na jobless. Not to mention 4 na milyon na unpaid family workers. Not to mention na may mga underemployed. Madadagdagan pa nito mga displaced. At saka yung mga nawalan ng livelihood sa mga informal sector. So therefore, ang sabi nila nung una, magsisring ang economy ng -1, but palagay ko abutin dito ng ang sabi nila -3, baka mahigit pa. So that is pag ganong minus, we're now towards a depression, hindi na lang recession. And ang projection this year is 6%. So lumabas po kayo, hindi yung ikakaila, ang daming naghihirap sa ating bansa. So, this is very similar sa situation noong 1983, 87, recession noong 1980, 81, 82. Pagdating ng 84 ay -1 or -2. Pagdating ng 1985, -5, 6. Talagang baksa agad si Marcos. And then, yung 86, 87, napakahina recovery. So, that is the crisis. Now, maulit ba ng ganong katagal? But definitely comparable. And then, so therefore, yung mga nangangarap na babalik sa old normals, may suntok sa buwan po yun. Sabagat, kaya dapat mag-ingat tayo sa mga nagsasabi na mag-stimulus. Ano kaya yung stimulus nila kung hindi maliwanag ang pupuntahan ng economy? Right now, ang OFW remittances, I predict will go down. We have around 20,000 na umuwi na. Meron pa mga hindi na record at merong libo-libo mga kung saang bansa na displaced already, hinahatinan. Nasa TV nga, dinadalhan ng mga kapwa Pilipino ng pagkain. Pero sabi ko, paano kaya ito? So ito yung kauna-unahang pangyayari sa overseas labor market na mga OFWs in crisis in different countries. Dati may crisis sa isang bansa, may nagkaroon ng problema sa South Korea. Pero this time, halos buong Middle East, sa Europe, sabi, meron lang maayos yung pangangailangan, yung mga health workers, pero ang laki naman ng danger sa kanila. At gusto nga natin silang pigilan. So, yung BPO naman is in plateau since 2017, hindi masyadong lumilit, hindi rin naman nag-grow na, lalo na yung call center portion. Tourism, siguro na, babasa nyo sa Boracay, mas matindi raw ang sitwasyon ngayon kaysa nung nag-lockdown para maglinis sila sa Boracay. Ano pag-asa niyan? And then yung seafaring industry, yung ating, I didn't realize na yung itong cruise industry sa daigdig, mga Pilipino pala ang mga nagpapatago niyan. Ang dami niyan. And then service industries, yung mga malls. May mga malls po na ayaw na mag-reopen kahit na mag-i-ease. So, this nationwide phenomenon because we have these requirements of distancing, etc. So, saka nakapaka-dependent po ng service industry sa remittances. So, all of this, on top of that, yes, we have a domestic industry is relatively weak. Domestic agriculture is relatively weak. Pero na-option itong mga growth centers. Pero ngayon, both those domestic and industry agriculture, sasamahan itong ng weak export, weak tourism. So, saan tayo pupulutin? Napakatindi po ng problema. Next. So, therefore, ang dapat isulong natin talagang anong alternative economy. May dinidiscuss sila sa gobyerno pero hindi po maliwanag. Parang nananalig pa rin sa mga dati. Parang nangangarap ng old normals na hindi ko malaman kung anong basihan. Ang neoliberalism na namayagpag sa daigdig the last 4 decades, itinatapo na in almost all countries. Starting with Trump sa US. Ang problem lang, wala namang clear consensus. Paano? And then ang mga dating pa rin, ang mga policy, neoliberal kahit dito sa atin. Yung pong nilabas ni Secretary Dominguez, yung 4 na pillars, palagi ko ang isang pinag-awayan nila ni Pernia, sa simula sinaid kagad ni Dominguez yung sinabi ni John Maynard Keynes na yung sinasabi na marami kasi mga economists lagi nagpo-project ng growth, katulad nitong Ramon Clarete doon sa kanyang PDP 2017-2022 na we will be a high level or developed middle class economy by 2040. And then nag-project siya ng growth every year. So, ang sabi naman nitong si Dominguez citing Keynes, in the long run, sabi raw ni Keynes, we are dead. And then, ang punto, you have to address present problems and present situation. So, kaya lang, hindi maliwanag sa akin kung sa pagsaset aside ng growth, hahawakan pa rin ba nila itong PDP 1722 na mukhang malayo na ang basihan. So, at the moment, ito nangyayari sa daigdig, nangyayari din sa atin. By force of circumstances, bumabalik ang public sector. Wala naman choice because it's the government that can only, in emergency, play the mobilizing role. But in some countries, they use this talaga para lalong palakasin. Katulad sa New Zealand, katulad dito sa South Korea, yan ang medyo mga champions dito sa containment. Kaya lumalakas ang public sector. They are rebuilding their public health facilities. Ganun din ginagawa natin, pero parang kulang. At na-shock ako na marami palang hospital sa Pilipinas ngayon is in very serious crisis. The health personnel in crisis. Kasi marami palang hospital nalulugi ngayon. Kasi wala nang gusto pumunta sa ospital. Isa na po ako doon. Kasi nung March, may sakit ako. Dapat mag-colonoscopy ako. Pero sabi ko, pag pumunta ko sa NKI, baka lalo magkakasakit. And nakita ko nga, yung mismo mga kaibigan ko, Dr. Hara, ayun, na-COVID, namatay. So, 1 out of 10 yata ay mga health workers na tinatamaan. Walang maliwanag na strategy. And so, at yung lockdown measures, kawawa talaga talaga ang mga manggagawa, lalo na yung nasa informal. Dito ho sa amin, pamisa-misa, lagi may dumadaan. Ang daming wala sa listahan ng gobyerno. Kasi ang basihan nila ay yung una, itong tinatawag nilang conditional cash transfer, 4 million. Tapos meron pa silang yung tinatawag na, 2015 statistics. 2020 na ngayon, 5 taon na. And then yung 2015 na statistics, batay pa yung sa survey nila ng mga 2014, 13. So, ang laki ng diferensya. And kaya sabi ng mayor ng Valenzuela, yung data ng DSWD, iba sa data nila na almost twice sapagkat saka hindi nila nabibilang yung mga migrante. Kung mayroon tayong overseas migrant, mga overseas labor market, within the Philippines, maraming mga magagawang umiikot. These are mobile force. And then, hindi listed sa mga barangay at kumisan ng umpahan 1 o 2 kwarto, kumisan nagtatayo lang sa tabi-tabi. Napakarami po yan, including the mga street dwellers. So, yan po ang overall situation. Next. So, therefore, dapat talaga mag-post tayo. Hindi ko po alam kung anong pinupost nyo dyan sa mga grupo nyo, kung ano ang alternative, but this is really an opportunity. And dapat makipag-dialogue tayo sa gobyerno. So that's why this week or next week, meron kaming dialogue with Senator Risa Ontiveros, yung aming alternatiba. But ngayon, ang panawagan ng trade unions globally, put people back at the center. Kasi yung the old neoliberal, everything in the service of the market, imaginary market. And so therefore, it's a big battle na labanan po natin. Ikalawa, maliwanag na maliwanag dito sa COVID, kailangan natin ng whole of society approach, buong lipunan. Ang sakit ng kalingkingan, sakit ng buong katawan. Now, sa trade union movement, ito ang mga ilang battlefields po natin. Paano i-retain ang jobs amidst economic crisis? Alam ko kaliwat kanan na ang layoff o dismissal o kaya nag-expire yung mga. Kumisa na po ay yung issue ng sabi ko ba, dapat bumalik ang industrial engineering, time and motion studies. And ang dole naman ang obsession nila yung flexi work. May hearing po next week sa flexi work. But primary muna, job retention and the participation ng mga manggagawa. Kung wala man silang trade union, meron ko ng magkaroon ng consultation as a whole. Sapagkat dapat sama-sama. And then may issue po tayo. Sino ba tatamaan regular o non-regular? Magbabawas ba ng regular para lahat ay non-regular? Or i-retain ng mga regular pero yung non-regular tatanggalin? So, iba-iba ang approach yan ng mga iba't ibang HR managers. And then yung mga regulars na ma-retain, sabi ko, ano kaya sila mag-multi-skilling? And then, of course, employers' efforts to roll back wages and rights. Yan, pag may crisis, laging ganyan ang kanilang reflex. Dapat nag-uusap talaga. And then with yung usapin ng health and safety na dati hindi natin, sa environment na dati na hindi pinapansin sa mga collective bargaining, all of a sudden, nasa center ng mga bagay-bagay at idadagdag natin yung sa COVID. So, never in the history of the labor movement na the health and safety issue has become so paramount. And then, finally, are unions willing to sit down with management to share pains? Kasi, maganda, dati siya sabi namin share pains, share gains. Pero this time, it's mainly pains. Kasi marami rin business, lalo na yung mga medium enterprises na nasasaktan. Dito lang, pumunta ko kayo dyan sa UP Village. Ang dami yung mga restaurant na tinayo a few years ago. More than half, sarado na po. At walang balak magbukas. So, may mga maliliit silang manggagawa. 1, 2, 3. Kakaawa po. Now, I was asked by Arnold na baka pwede ko rin i-discuss yung UBI. I don't know why ito naisipan yung i-discuss. But this is an old running debate. And isang araw nakita ko lang si Guy Standing. Kilala ko po yun isa sa proponent ng UBI. It is hotly debated sa Europe. Divided ang mga economists, divided ang mga trade unions sa Europe. At even yung mga nasa kaliwa, divided. In the first place, even yung sa right, may mga gusto din sa UBI. Si Milton Friedman, yung neoliberal godfather, to a certain extent, sinuportahan niya yung concept niya ng negative income tax. Sina Martin Luther naman, yung kanilang demand. Ito yung mga 1960s pa, demand for guaranteed income for all. But I'm not sure whether ganito rin ang pananaw ng mga naunang mga socialist. Ang alam ko, katulad ng ibang mga socialist, ang idea nila, it is the duty of government to create jobs for all, and those who will not work, no work shall not eat. Pero anyway, mga ganyan. Sumikat po yung debate na yan sapagkat lumagas yung technology revolution, fourth industrial revolution, lumagas din yung globalization. Nakita ng mga ilang mga kapitalista at government na hindi na mabibigyan ng trabaho ang lahat. So, baka ang solusyon nga ay UBI para ma-stabilize yung society. Of course, yung mga kumukontra naman, ito ay sumisira sa productivity at nasisira ang papel ng market. Next. But with COVID and economic realities, palagi ko hindi naman ito magprosper sa Pilipinas as a policy issue for discussion. Imagine if you have 40 million workers, I think we have now mga 45 million labor force. Bibigyan mo ng 500 pesos a day for 300 days. Alisin mo na yung 65 days ng 1 year. Mag-aabot din po ito ng 6 trillion pesos. Saan kukuha ang gobyerno? Right now, iniisip ng gobyerno mag-imprenta ng pera at umutang. Pero kahit yung pag-utang hindi ho ganun kadali sapagkat halos lahat ng mga developing countries nangungutang ngayon. And then, gumastos na tayo ng 1.4 trillion. And then, ngayon pinag-uusapan sa Kongreso, another 1 trillion. And then, pag nagkaroon ng monster wave, siguro 1 or 2 trillion. As it is, we are now sinking into going to depression. So, ang issue ngayon ay survival of all. But again, how do you formulate it? Ito ay dapat pag-usapan natin lahat. So, next slide. So, therefore, ang issue ngayon is how do you bail out the working people, meaning formal and informal. And then sa UBI, I don't think this government is in a position to embrace itong UBI. And by the way, sa UBI, wala naman ako nakikitang maayos na adoption. Yung Finland nag-experiment, pero hindi naman nila in-adapt. Nagbigay sila ng pondo sa 20,000 unemployed, pero nakita nila halos wala namang epekto sa labor market nila. So to conclude, yes, next slide. So ang mahalaga ho ay talagang pag-isipan natin ano ang ating kabuuang pang-alternatiba. Now, kanina binanggit ko yung crisis noong 1982-87, ang tingin ko is very similar. Noong panahon na yon, kabi-kabila ang strike, kabi-kabila ang sarahan ng mga industriya. Nag-focus noon ang trade union at CSO sa pagpatalsik kay Marcos at pag-akyat kay Cory. Pero si Cory naman, ibinalik niya yung old-style elite politics. Tinanggap niya yung IMF Structural Adjustment Program. Ang effect naman ng Structural Adjustment Program, 1980s was a lost decade. 1990s was a lost decade. 2000, a lost decade. I'm not going to the details of this. So, ito yung panahon na massive ang pagguho ng industry, massive ang pagguho ng agriculture, massive ang pagdami ng unemployed pa at may hirap. Sinave lang tayo ng OFW na dumami ng dumami at lagi tayong consumption ridden. Pero ngayon, na may crisis din ng overseas labor market, saan tayo pupulutin? Yung po ang nais kong banggitin. So, to conclusion na po. Last slide po. So, shall we go back to the old normals? Hindi ko po alam kung ano ibig sabihin ng old normals. And ang alam ko lang, kinakailangan makipaglaban tayo para sa isang development framework na inclusive, balanced at sustainable. But ito po ay dapat sama-sama natin buuin. Yan lamang po, mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rene Ofreneo. We learned this afternoon about the 3-year situation that flattening the curve, beating this pandemic, and the consequences on labor and work that goes with it is more than just this year, but it could be a 3-year situation given that terminating the virus relies so much on the vaccine. At the same time, how we need to set aside growth forecasts and the need for adjustments on growth and labor. We've also answered the question on how much the universal basic income proposal would cost in the Philippines. And at the same time, the consequences and debates and questions that go with it. as experienced by other countries, and the need for a whole of society approach and on how itong economic recession that we are going through is similar to the crisis of the 80s and would need for a systemic change that would reverse the massive deindustrialization, low agricultural development, and a consumption-led system. For our reaction on Dr. Rene's presentation, we now call on Mr. CJ Castillo, the Senior Researcher of Learn.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can I share my screen? Ayun. Alright. So meron lang akong few points. Unang-una, salamat sa pag-invite sa akin dito para maging reactor. And salamat din kay Rene Ofreneo sa kanyang presentation. Medyo long time no si nga, sir, no? Ayan nyo pag nawala itong pandemic, daan ako sa Solair. And
Ako na nandun sa iyo.
Let me start. May two parts yung aking presentation. So first part, I'll be reviewing the situation. So brief review lang. And in the second part, let me just raise some points about the ways forward. Okay, so let's look at the situation. So we had a lockdown. The government imposed a lockdown in March. And ang unang epekto niyan, merong mga displaced workers. So a colleague from, or our friends from the academy estimated. So si Muirong ito recently lang, she came up with an estimate of the total displaced workers. And ang kanyang estimate is about 23.5 million workers in the Philippines. No? Yan yung mga total na displaced. And yung highest rate ng displacement ay nasa NCR at 77%. Meanwhile, in Luzon, the estimate is about 60%. Sa Visayas, that's 54%. In Mindanao, 44%. So malaki yung chunk ng mga employed ang nawalan ng, hindi necessarily unemployed, no? Kasi iba yung displaced sa unemployed. Displaced workers can still have their jobs but they are not at work. So baka hindi nga mag-reflect ito dun sa ginagawang labor force survey nung April. No? And recently the government announced contraction of the economy by negative 0.2%. So negative po ang ating growth, hindi lumaki ang ekonomiya at ayon sa PSA, ito ay dahil sa pagbaba ng investments. So gross capital formation, 18.3%. Yung ating exports ay bumagsak din. Meanwhile, tumaas daw ng bahagya. Sobrang liit ng pinagtaas ng household consumption spending, increasing only by 0.2%. Yung government spending, yan, expect natin na tumaas dahil nasa crisis period tayo. Ang estimate ng PSA is about 7%. Yan. On the supply side, agriculture fell by 0.4%, industry fell by 3%. Medyo malaki yun. Kaya lang, ang na-capture lang ng growth figures na to ay yung lockdown period ng March. I think last week lang yata ng March yun. No? So we expect that the contraction of the economy in the second quarter of the year will be deeper. And ito yung base sa aming simulation. So preliminary result lang muna ito. Ine-expect namin na yung GDP would fall by about 4.6% for the entire year due to the reduction in labor endowment. So, ibig sabihin, dahil hindi nakapasok yung mga manggagawa sa kanilang mga trabaho, hindi nakapag-produce yung economy. Yun. Yung negative growth will likely lead to employment loss. We estimate that about employment can decline by about 7%. So, yung growth natin na negative 0.2, pwede itong magbawas ng mahigit sa 3 million workers na employed. So, yan yung isang tanong, no? Paano ka mag-generate ng trabaho para sa 3 million or more than 3 million workers? Ang estimate ng DOL is about 5 million, no? So, malaki yun. Ang tupad nila ay less than 1 million yung kinocover. I think less than 500,000 nga yata. So, ang isang epekto nung lockdown, nawalan ng earnings yung mga manggagawa at syempre yung kanilang mga pamilya, nagbigay ang gobyerno ng subsidy between 5,000 pesos and 8,000 pesos. So, depende sa level of minimum wage dun sa kanilang mga regions. Yung 8,000 sa NCR, yun yung pinakamalaki. Nung kinompare namin ito sa FIES figures, so yung Family Income and Expenditure Survey, it turns out hindi sapat yung ayuda na binigay ng gobyerno. Bukod syempre sa hindi may delay sa distribution. No? So, mas mababa kaysa sa average spending ng mga pamilya yung ayudang kanilang tatanggap. Pero may mga household naman na sapat yung binigay na ayuda. Ito yung mga nasa lowest income groups. Kasi mababa rin naman kasi yung spending nila, no? Kapag sila ay nag-spend ng nasa level na pwede nating tawaging disente, kulang yung binibigay na ayuda ng gobyerno. Bukod syempre sa late yung kanilang distribution. Alright, alam natin na wala pa ring mass testing, inamin ng gobyerno na walang mass testing. Unfortunately, the discourse shifted to definitions, no? What mass means. Do we test all? Yung ba yung mass testing? And may isa pang argument na it's too costly for the Philippines, no? Without necessarily looking at the benefits. No, may nakita akong Facebook post recently, si Representative Stella Kimbo. She argues that before we even talk about whether mass testing is plausible or not, we should look at its cost and benefit. No? So, dapat mag-conduct ng cost and benefit analysis muna bago i-dismiss na too costly ang mass testing. Bakit ba natin gusto yung mass testing? Napaka-importante nito lalo na sa recovery kasi kailangan pumunta ng mga manggagawa sa work, no? Kaya lang kailangan mo rin i-ensure yung kanilang safety na hindi sila mahahawa. May gusto kong i-share na isang screen here. So, kita nyo ba? So, gumawa ako ng simple simulation ng spread ng disease. So, kung makikita ninyo dito, ayan, gumagana. So, ito yung mga individuals. So, yan. And nag-i-interact sila, gumagalaw, kumikilos. Simulate nito yung simple simulation lang ito ng ating ekonomiya. Suppose nagkaroon ng infection. So, yung mga yellow na individuals na yan yung mga infected. Pero hindi nila alam na sila ay infected. No? So, nakikita niyo yung spread ng disease. Pag meron tayong mass testing, we'll be able to identify which of these individuals are sick. Pero minsan, pag ganito nakarami, masyado nang madami yung na-infect, hindi na, kahit mass testing, kung hindi na mag-work yan. No? So let's do that again. So let's infect some people around this one. So yan yung spread. Nakikita natin yung mga yellow individuals. And dito sa gilid ay mayroong graph showing the number. And if we do mass testing, we identify the sick people, alam ng mga tao kung ano yung mga iiwasan nilang areas or communities. Ito yung pag inon natin lockdown, so may titigil yung movement ng mga tao, that will further reduce spread of disease. See? So medyo nag-flatten. So yan yung nangyari ngayon, no? Pero kailangan ng mass testing kasi kailangan ibalik yung we still live in a market economy. So kailangan bumalik yung activities sa ating ekonomiya. Alright, so yun. So sa simulation na to bumagsak yung number of infected with mass testing and lockdown. Sayang nga lang, no, kasi hindi pala nag-mass testing ang gobyerno during the 2-month lockdown. Alright, so yun lang yung point. Napakahalaga nung mass testing, lalo na kapag bumalik na sa trabaho ang mga tao. Alright, so ano pa yung na-observe natin na pwedeng mangyari? Deterioration in labor standards. Occupational hazard na ang COVID-19. No? We need to recognize that. DOLE and DTI recently released an interim guidelines on workplace prevention and control of COVID-19. So pino-cover nito yung mga following areas: increasing the physical and mental resilience of workers. So ang recommendation nila, eating nutritious food, drinking plenty of fluids, adequate sleep, exercise. Meron ding guidelines on keeping workplaces COVID-free. Kasama dyan yung wearing of masks, temperature check, disinfection of workplace, physical distancing, and encouraging arrangements such as work from home. And may guidelines din na, may part din yung guidelines na nag-outline ng duties of employers and workers. Pero may part din dito na sinishift ng government yung responsibility ng COVID testing sa mga employers. So, etong yung set of guidelines na nilabas nila is not really a department order. So, I'm not sure how the DTI and DOLE plans to enforce this. All right, so about the ways forward, honestly, work in progress pa rin sa akin ito. Yung labor, I think, has conducted series of discussions with policymakers, pero hindi pa rin final yung kanilang recovery proposal. And we note that radical shift in the system, medyo mahirap yan, no? Hindi nga tayo makapag-rally. We can't even mobilize right now. And we need to think about how to get to what we want, no? So let me raise some considerations. Yung government natin is stuck in a mindset of trade-offs. So for instance, yung proposal ng UBI, binanggit na ito ni Secretary Carl Chua sa kanyang presentation, I think last week, na dinismiss niya yung proposals na that would entail a lot of fiscal spending. So stuck sila dun sa mindset ng trade-offs. So kunwari, yung basic income yan, i-dismiss agad yan na too costly. Next, mahina ang mga union ngayon. Trade unionism is at its weakest. I think ang union density ngayon among enterprises, formal enterprises, is about 7%. Pag kinompare mo sa buong labor force or sa employed labor force, sa employment, that's only about, if not less than 1%, no? Around 1% lang. So masyadong maliit. And unions are not able to respond to attacks on labor rights kagaya dati. So bawal lumabas, walang picket, walang mob. Possible ba yung online organizing? No? So magandang tanong yan. We don't know. Recovery program, yun nga, labor is still working on its proposed recovery program. Nagkaisa sa labor coalition. It's the broadest labor coalition right now. It conducted series of discussions about this, dialogues with policymakers, and we have friends and colleagues from the academe proposed, si Cruz, si Jeric, at saka si Majo, proposed identifying and supporting sectors that contribute in terms of employment, sectors that boost household consumption, and sectors that have extensive forward linkages. So among these sectors are, so yung health sector, so no-brainer yun, no? Kailangan suportahan ng gobyerno yung health sector, garments and textile, to produce PPEs, agriculture, and food manufacturing, of course, food. And then construction, because of its multiplier effects and its long-term effect on growth. Pero according to the authors, the BBB needs to be recalibrated. Other sectors include transport and logistics, retail, finance, petroleum and fuel, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals. Itong mga sector na to, yung output, yung kanilang products serve as input in a lot of sectors. So one point nito is ensure that supply side is still working. Next, one of the goals of recovery program is to preserve employment, and we know that the pandemic will certainly change how we do our work. So meron kaming ongoing research, and we found out that in the last 5 years, technological change was not labor displacing. Kaya lang, we think that marireverse yung trend na ito. Baka lalong ma-motivate ng mga firms to automate their processes, lalo na considering yung hindi madaling mawawala yung pandemic eh. And we know that gains from technological change is captured by those who own technology. So yung mga firms, big companies. Yung second package ng tax reform tries to address or tries to align government policies with the ongoing fourth industrial revolution. But I am not sure if this is enough to address yung impacts ng automation sa employment. And we also need to look at safety at work. No? So mahalagang tignan yung occupational safety and health, ensure that standards are observed. And I think we need to use incentives to promote OSH. No? So yun nga, DOLE and DTI jointly released guidelines, kaya lang the guidelines are not department orders, so medyo questionable yung enforcement, and we need to acknowledge that COVID-19 has become an occupational hazard. So meron kaming ginagawa na survey on occupational safety and health. This is an extension of the work done by FPS, SIAN, and Centro. So in-expand lang namin yung coverage. Should be done by next month. And Senator Risa Hontiveros also has a bill about health and safety at work in the time of the pandemic. All right, so last point. Ito yung wala tayo ngayon, political power. No? Kailangan natin to jump from the current system to the system that we want. That's it.
Thank you very much, CJ, for your presentation. CJ post a higher figure, no, in comparison to Dole's 2 million, that there are 23.5 million workers displaced, which is about 57% of the workers. He's also talked about how GDP growth will fall by 4.6% and that negative growth could also lead to unemployment. We've also talked about yung importance of mass testing in order to isolate and treat people, especially when operations are back, and at the same time yung enforcements of guidelines, no, in worker safety, and especially how we in moving forward we can organize during this pandemic and build political power, which is a huge question, no, for us in the shift in how we do things in this new normal. We have a set of people who have questions, no. We invite Ate Mai Hega from Akbayan Women for the first question.
Okay, sige. Justin, magandang
Ano po?
hapon. Magandang hapon din kay Karine at kay CJ. No? Kanina nabanggit ni CJ na sa job displacement may 23.5 million na mawawalan ng trabaho. Sa pag-aaral ba ni either ni Karine o ni CJ at yung mga affected sectors ay malaki yung mga women, yung mga women na nandun sa mga affected sectors tulad ng tourism, services at informal sector. So sa pag-aaral ba ni Karine at ni CJ, ay ilang porsyento ba nitong 23.5 million ang kababaihang manggagawa? Okay. So pangalawa, related dun sa tanong na yun, kung gagawa tayo ng isang programa ng employment recovery o kaya ay yung employment generation policy, papaano natin masisigurado na sa mga pulisiyang ito at sa programang ito ay makoconsider pa rin yung labor participation rate ng mga kababaihang manggagawa?
And who would like to start answering on the question?
Yeah, sige.
Karen, yes po.
Yeah. Actually, alim na post-COVID, gamitin natin yung post-lockdown. Lockdown, ang estimate ni mahigit sa 50%, even higher actually, sapagkat lockdown is virtually a strike against the entire economy. Yung, di ba, medyo hintulutan lang yung military part of the bureaucracy, part of the mga LGUs, but majority talaga, totoo yun, displacing. Ngayon, ang malaking issue, after the lockdown, starting June, anong mangyayari? Sino kabalik sa trabaho? So that is a very big problem. And then, mga kababaihan, and of course kalalakihan, both affected, pero mas doon sa malaking tinamaan ng husto during the lockdown ay yung informal market labor. Ito yung may hearing nga last ng isang araw sa House of Representatives, revival ng Magna Carta for workers in the formal economy. Ito, nakita ng tao na kaya pala ang lalim ng krisis sapagkat yung informal economy na nakadugtong sa mga poor communities, rural poor communities, peri-urban poor communities. 2/3 ng labor force ay nasa informal. Marami na-exclude sa social amelioration. Kasi nga yung listahan, lang. So, and then karamihan pa doon sa informal, marami ho doon ay mga home-based workers, mga vendors, mga so talagang dimay ang pangyayari. So therefore, dapat pong pag-aralan doon naman sa formal sector. Remember, the biggest sector ng economy ay services. And sa services, again, majority ay kababaihan na naman. Kaso, marami rin po ay nakadikit dito sa tinatawag na mga subcontracting arrangement, mga seasonal. So, hindi ko alam kung ano mangyayari ngayon. Ang duda ko, isang pwedeng bantayan ni na CJ ng sentro, itong sa June, nakita ng mga bangko, pwede pala sila mag-operate ng walang tao, sinasara pa ang mga branches. Andun ako magkakaroon ng massive layoff sa mga bangko eh. And then lahat na lang dadaanin sa online. Kung kinaka. Medyo, so buta, kalanakan ka ba yan, maapektuhan, but particular, mga babae po, affected, whether formal or informal. Lamang po.
Thank you, Dr. Rene. CJ?
Sinusubukan kong i-crunch yung data, no? Sorry, ma'am, kasi yung study na nila Moirong and ay na-miss out yung gender aspect, no? But I'll try to come up with figures and give you answer later.
Okay.
Pero yung about sa
Sige,
question
salamat.
nyo sa how do we ensure that women benefit from recovery programs, well, we need to fight for it. Yung labor, they had a dialogue with Representative Kimbo. Kasi meron siyang bill about recovery program, and one of the proposals that they suggested, one of their proposals was to install a labor representative to help monitor the implementation of the stimulus package. So, nabanggit din doon syempre na kailangan bantayan yung employment ng women. Dapat mag-benefit din yung mga women.
Okay, sige. Salamat Karen, at salamat CJ.
Thank you, Ate Mai. Our next question comes from Paeng David from Center for Youth Advocacy and Networking. Hello, Paeng.
Yeah, hello. Yung siguro po gusto lang din namin tingnan, coming from Sian, and CJ was also able to share that we're doing a study on occupational safety and health. But one thing that we wanted to look at, of course, is the impact on young professionals if you've had research. And of course, similar to the question of Ate Mai, if there are ways that we can ensure that the youth sector, especially in the labor force, are protected in terms of layoffs and in terms of recovery policies.
Thank you, Paeng. Okay, question on how can the youth be protected amidst this disruption sa labor and sa work. Dr. Rene or CJ?
Well, sige ma'am. Ang isang realidad, before COVID, ang ating economy and also the labor market in particular, very segmented, both in the formal and informal. Doon sa formal, yung sinasabi mo, maraming professionals, but even the professionals, iba-ibang sub-sector yan, segments. Take for example, yung sa GMA, ABS-CBN, meron dyan mga regular, meron dyan mga talents na highly paid, can dictate, mga talents na very casual, isang kahig, isang tuka, meron so marami ho yan. And then now yung sa tinamaan, yung mga nasa entertainment, of course you have mga professionals sa BPO, call center, mga work from home, pero meron din mga freelancers, iba-iba ho. Pero yung adjustment, ayan, at saka anong effect sa sector by sector na mga professionals, siguro yan ay pwede pag-aralan ng grupo ni na CJ. Malaking research po, ayan. But the reality today, we don't have a homogeneous labor market or labor force. And that's why, yung pag-organize ngayon, ay suggest sa mga kaibigan sa trade union movement, bigyan ng pagkakataon, bawat sector, katulad ng mga informal, home-based, o yung mga vendors, kanya-kanyang karapatan mag-organize based on their interest at based on their condition, but we cannot impose a common or uniform form of organizing. But yung right to organize is a universal. Yung bargaining is also universal, but you don't have to bargain with a particular employer. You can bargain with the contractor, you can bargain with the local government. Yan po ay iba-iba rin, but universalization of rights, pero iba-iba ang guwan. And then mag-unite na lang ang mga tao based on a common vision of development. Yun lang.
Thank you, Professor Rene. CJ?
Yes. think yung mga youth ngayon ay employed sa mga sectors na nag-utilize ng technology like BPOs. And hindi ko pa lang na-check kung ano yung impact sa kanila. Hindi ko pa na-check kung ano yung impact ng lockdown across sectors. Pero alam natin yung BPO, they are allowed to operate under the lockdown. Although marami ring mga workers with ages less than 35 na employed sa manufacturing. Although I can say hindi sila ganun kalaki doon. Pero mostly sa services. So yung sa BPO, baka hindi sila masyadong affected. Although may difficulties yung pagpunta nila sa trabaho, sa manufacturing, yung mga hindi essential na manufacturing like food manufacturing, baka hindi rin sila makapunta sa trabaho. So affected sila ng lockdown na to. Ang isang way forward dito is ensure that when we have the recovery program, all of these sectors are considered. And all of these sectors are, should I say, put on the table. Walang interest na mawawala. And I think dapat may representation yung youth, lalo na sa mga organized labor. Ngayon, kasi medyo mahina yan, no? Pag tinignan mo na lang yung composition na nagkaisa leadership, siguro less than 2 or less than 10, 5 ang part doon na mga youth, no? So karamihan doon mga, our seasoned labor leaders. So dapat mag-open up doon yung mga unions sa mga younger workers, no? Para ma-integrate yung interest nila sa mga policy proposals.
Ayan, thank you CJ and Dr. Rene. So malaking hamon yung itong recovery plan, no? At yung pag-involve sa iba't ibang mga sectors within the labor sector, kasi hindi din homogeneous at disproportionately affected yung iba't ibang mga sectors within. We have a lot of questions at the Q&A box, and we also have some attendees with their hands up. We're just gonna take the question from Ate Cindy from Friends of Akbayan USA, and then next from Angie Tan from CMA, and then Ka Eta Rosales' question, and Kuya Tom's question, and then we'll read some questions on the Q&A box. Okay, to Ate Cindy from Friends of Akbayan USA.
Justin, I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Ate Cindy. Can we have Miss Ate Angie Tan?
Can we hear Cindy? Comment.
Well, I think what the Philippines is facing is very similar to the questions that is very similar to the questions that the labor movement and workers in the United States are facing. The issue of health and safety, the issues of healthcare, and the question of, will we go back to the old norm or will we have a new norm? Except the crisis in the United States is unprecedented. Even though in the Great Depression, there were 38 million people unemployed, that took over the course of two years. Within 3 months, there are now 43 million unemployed workers in the United States. And so the younger you are, the more in economic crisis you are. The older workers, the retirees are fairly stable, but it's the younger workers from 30 to 44. So it's that generation who already faces instability because of costs of education, loans. And so for them, this has stripped away the notion that capitalism is the best for working people. And then now what you'll see is a trickle down of people losing their homes, comparable, even worse than in the 2008 crisis, in which millions of people lost their homes, especially African Americans, and which led to an increasing crisis of homelessness. And then in the United States, it's the people that are highest, disproportionately impacted are the Native Americans, African Americans, and Latinos. Their economic crisis will not be remedied in the next year or 2 years or 3 years. It will be a long time, and only if in the United States we can begin to implement, I think, a public jobs program, which will provide health care, will provide well-paying jobs, and will rebuild the infrastructure of the United States. If we can do job sharing, in which is being done in Germany, where the government can subsidize the job sharing, but more so, where's that money going to come from? The money has to come from tax reform, in which the rich in the United States are going to pay their fair share, but also it's where the money can be had is by ending the U.S. military budget and using that military budget and essentially then ending war that's being launched all over the world by the United States and using that budget to subsidize and to create health care for all, which is going to be a reality given this crisis. If anything comes out of this crisis, it's going to be health care for all. But a public jobs program in which it'll put people back to work, rebuilding roads, bridges, dams, and training people. And that will also benefit most the communities of color, which have suffered so much under this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Ate Cindy, for sharing on the situation in the United States and on how Native Americans, African Americans, and Latinos are disproportionately affected amidst this labor crisis. We'll have Angie Tan's question on this topic. Okay, let's proceed to Ka Eta's comment. Hello? Okay, we're just waiting for Ka Eta to turn on her mic and her camera. Okay, we'll start with some questions first here on our chat. No, there's one question on this from an anonymous attendee. Sa nakaraang mga buwan sa lockdown, nakita natin ang lumaking dependence natin sa mga delivery services such as Grab, Foodpanda, Lalamove. Dahil hindi karaniwan ang kaayusan ng mga empleyado ng mga kumpanyang ito, ni regular or contractual, saan makakapasok ang labor organizing at pagtaguyod ng karapatan ng mga TNVS operators bilang mga manggagawa?
Si CJ po ang sasagot.
Okay, sige.
So may attempt na po na i-organize yung mga drivers na under sa TNVS. I think even before the COVID, kaya lang hindi pa masyadong progress. Pero so far, I think kayang i-organize ng mga TNVS drivers yung kanilang mga sarili. Nakita na natin yan last year ba yun? Nung nagkaroon sila ng mga massive demonstrations, kunwari sa cancellation ng license or was that the license or just the permit or just the corporate ng what's this, yung angkas, no? So nakita na natin na kaya nila mag-mobilize. I think ang kailangan nilang gawin ay mas mag-form ng mas formal organization and at the same time mas palalimin yung involvement ng kanilang mga members.
Thank you, CJ. Kayo po, Dr. Rene, do you have a rejoinder on that?
Hindi na siguro. I think ang issue ko lang dyan sa mga delivery, yung sa business side, they're taking advantage of the situation. Yung mga maliliit na food producers, gusto sana dumikit sa kanila, pero ang taas ng singil nila. So medyo dapat wala kasing maliwanag na rules of engagement. This is a new area ng economy and lalakas.
Thank you, Dr. Rene. Yes, and we're seeing some facilitation by local governments or even the Office of the Vice President on how they can engage these companies and at the same time provide employment, provide some livelihood to like workers or to small-time na mga enterprises who wants to bridge to their different customers amidst the lockdown. Ka Eta is here with us right now for her comment. Yes, Ka Eta. Hello, Ka Eta.
Okay, can you hear?
Ayan.
Sorry about that. Okay. 3 points. One, I agree with Rene. Sectoral organizing.
Ayan.
Is weak.
Sorry, Ka Eta. We cannot, di ko po naririnig yung question nyo. You might be using 2 devices. If you can just shut down yung isang device for now, para we will get your voice clearly.
Can you hear me?
Yes po, pero may echo lang ng konti. I will have the staff help you po with setting up Eta, if we can come back to you para maano po namin yung voice niyo. We'll just proceed with, I think si kasamang Tom had his hands up earlier. If we can have his question or comment. Ayan, Kuya Tom, you're on mute if you're trying to join us.
Hello.
Ayan,
Yeah.
we hear you.
Magandang hapon, no, Karine.
Congressman, magandang hapon.
Oo. Tama po kayo. Lahat tayo ay naka-strike ngayon. No? 32 million workers naka-lockdown. Well, yung una, my point is about this, the economy. Technically, we are in a recession. No? Magsi-second quarter na. And prognosis and data from NEDA, talagang negative pa rin, no? yung second quarter na growth rate. Ang implication nito is practically unemployment. No? So yung data ni CJ, 23.5 million, mukhang magkakatotoo yan. No? And I think yung young workers, no, the youth will be mostly affected because firms will not be hiring new staff. No? And practically, ang new staff, you get it from the young workers. No? Secondly, ang major na problema in this period ay pag unemployed, lalo na kung medyo matagal, you become de-skilled, no? or demotivated. No? And the problem with that is kung walang training, no, intervention yung pamahalaan and even the private sector, no, talagang to focus, no, on skills enhancement, no? Skill set enhancement ay talagang hindi natin masasabayan, no? If ever that parang yung economy. But generally, ang tanong ko is ano yung mga interventions, no? Because so far, lahat ng social protection measures ay targeted, no? As against yung universal, no? So the wage subsidies, no? You cannot continue wage subsidies, no? Especially if 10% of your GDP, maabot na tayo sa 10%, no? Ang ginagamit mo for just these amelioration programs. So ang question is, how much can yung public sector, no, spending accommodate, or even kung ang plano is another 6 months, no? Kasi the way I see it, in this pre-vaccine phase, 50% pa rin ang mangyayaring kuan diyan eh. Return to work, no? I mean 50% practically will not be working, no, for the next 6 months. So, yung public sector funding or financing that goes to employment, napakaliit yan, no, in terms of the GDP, no? That's only 11 or 12%, no? Yung major is consumption because we are a service sector-driven and consumption-driven economy. Yung bagsak ng consumption, which is 68% of the economy, no, ay malaking impact din siya, no? So if ever na ang pinaka-major na bunga nitong lockdown is really yung drastic drop sa consumption, no? So ang next na tanong is saang industries, no? Because the proposal of government ay one is of course yung sa corporate income tax reduction, then digital taxes, digital economy tax. But one of the major policy direction is itong yung public utilities, no? To expand the definition of public utilities and take it out from the constitutional prohibition na hindi na siya necessarily na 60% Filipino owned, no? So most likely post-lockdown scenarios is the passage of the Public Services Act, no, amendments that practically will open up all industries, including mining and other extractive industries, no, to foreign investors. The question is, of course, we need employment, no? But itong pag-open up ng ating ekonomiya, practically, no, na lahat na under na public utilities would be given up, no, as our sovereign rights. So, do you think yung direction ba na yan could also generate employment and, of course, yan nga, may balik probinsya, I think one of the goals of the Balik Probinsya is mas maraming workers for mining, mas maraming workers para dun sa extractive mga industries that would only be found in rural areas. No? So, yung ganong direction, wala pa tayong parang comprehensive na response, diba? Kasi ang tanong sa atin, so anong alternative, no, employment strategies, no, na dapat sustainable and at the same time would be kwan sa workers, no? So I think yung mga ganon, mga strategic na policy directions, we need to have also a comprehensive response. Whether we would still continue the old normal of extraction and disposal, an economy that is consumption driven at saka extractive at saka throw away economy. So yan yung parang big challenge. What would be our response to that? Thank you.
Ayan, thank you po, kasamang Tom. Any take, Doc Rene, CJ?
Sige po, okay. Una sa lahat, maraming salamat kay kasamang Tom. Sana maisulat niya yung kanyang malalim na analysis ng economy sabagat maganda yung kanyang analysis. Ang problema malaki po ng gobyerno, hindi rin maliwanag sa nila kung ano ang tamang direksyon. Kaya binanggit ko kanina si Dominguez, binabanggit niya si John Maynard Keynes. Si John Maynard Keynes po, government intervention ang framework noon. At ang pinakamagandang halimbawa ng government intervention, yung ginawa ni Franklin Roosevelt noong 1930s at the height of the Great Depression. Kabi-kabila ang jobs na kinikreate ng government. Katulad ng binabanggit kanina ni kasamang Cindy. But on the other hand, you hear from government, buksan ang economy, bawasan ang corporate tax, but you see, para pumasok daw ang foreign investment and then i-liberalize pa totally. But assuming na may papasok na foreign investment on the base of tax cuts, you know, it will take years bago mamunga ng jobs yan, bago mag-decide sila ng project. So, it's hindi ang solution na immediate, assuming. In other words, what I'm saying is, they're talking Keynesian, pero ang reflex nila is neoliberal. Now, also in relation to this, parang hindi nila pinag-aaralan nangyayari sa daigdig. That's why yung isa sa mahusay na businessman, yung napaka-Farsi, hindi ko naman siya sabing mahusay siya sa bayan, pero mahusay siya sa negosyo niya. Ito si Enrique Razon. Noong pong April, na-interview siya, sinabi niya, globalization is dead. And sabi ko, wow, meron siyang operations sa Latin America, yung support operations sa Africa. Kasi ano ba ang kinabukasan ng yung old normal sa globalization? More trading? I don't think there's such a thing. The global value chain is broken. Kaya medyo may crisis ngayon, yung US-China trade war. At ngayon, gusto pa na Trump, kung pwede, alisin na sa China yung mga ibang products. Ganon din ang ginagawa ng mga ibang bansa. So this is the time to think domestic, yung industrial policy mo at home. So, yung proposal talaga kanina ni Cindy was very good. Yung at this particular time, this is war, giyera po. Wala, sinong pwede manguna? Is government. Unfortunately, we have a government na kulang sa development vision at hindi maliwanag kung may support ng taong bayan. And then pag may giyera, iminomobilize mo ang sambayanan. Kung ako po tatanungin nyo, yung sa public works, dapat i-tweak yung build. I'm not against infra development. Pero maliwanag, under the pandemic, ang tinamaan talaga ay mga komunidad ng urban poor, rural poor, peri-urban, coastal, etc. Marami hindi nakatingin pa ng ayuda. At marami dyan ay napaka-vulnerable sa mga climate change risks, etc. Bukod sa nawalan ng mga displacement sa livelihood. But gamitin yung sinasabing ni Cindy, public jobs creation. Rebuild communities. using yung mga labor na yan. So yung sa halip na ang focus mo lang magbigay ng ayuda, give them jobs. So cash transfer for work, cash transfer to build community centers, cash transfer to build stronger communities. And then also rebuild yung, alam mo, yung public healthcare system, may counting efforts, pero it's not enough. It's very clear na the public healthcare system is broken because of years of privatization. Pero pwede naman pala gumastos ng ganong kalaki. Why not build it? Yun ang success ng Korea eh. They rebuild yung public healthcare system and magkaroon ng maayos na public distribution system sa mga goods. So to a certain extent, ginagawa ni William there, pero very limited. Nakita natin na ang problema ng mga magsasaka, hindi nakakaabot dito yung mga goods nila. But it can be rebuilt. And itapon na itong rice tarification law. It's a terrible law. And ilagay na lang sa bunganga ni Ramon Claret yan. Yung rice tarification. Sila mga author kasi niyan eh. Kitang-kita mo na maling-mali ang mga framework nila, development framework. This is the time talaga na you have to put people back. And it's not only the government there, it's the whole society. So you have to, like in war, total mobilization. And kung hindi po nila ayusin ito, nakakatakot ho ang mangyayari kasamang Tom this year and next year. I don't know yung paano nila iaapo. How will they apulahin? Ano yun? Yung control ang hunger and anger ng mga unemployed and displaced. Medyo malubha po by the end of the year. Nakakatakot at yung pera na iniisip na stimulus, nakikita ko is running low, very low. Saan sila kukuha? At sino magpapautang? Nagpautang ang ADB, $1.5 billion. Ang hinahanap nila ngayon is $40 billion. For next year, saan sila kukuha? So it's very, very difficult. Nakakatakot, actually hot, nakakatakot ang sitwasyon and hindi maliwanag ko ng future, whether it will be good or bad. But this is the time na you really need to come up with emergency solutions na kasama mo ang sambayanan.
Yung point ko kanina, Doc Rene, yung 68% of our economy is consumption.
Yes.
It's a consumption. So I think it's also one factor.
Actually, 75% yung consumption.
So, di ba, yung consumption driven economy with this recession, di ba, unemployment that follows, talagang babagsak yan. So what parang measures needed? Tama yung sinasabi nyo, no? Na it's inward looking because global trade ay bagsak na, no? And even rice, we cannot import na from Vietnam, Thailand, no? Because they themselves want to conserve it for their own. So inward looking economy. Ang problema, ang policy prescription mo ay to attract investments, no? Lowering corporate tax. But Vietnam, 20% na lang yung tax nila, ilo-lower nila ng 15% or 18%. But we cannot compete with Vietnam to attract investors. No? And tama, yung employment from lowering corporate tax, hindi yan mangyayari in the next 2 years, 3 years. So what they are planning, I think, is itong balik probinsya is to attract extractive industries. No? Because extractive industries like mining and fishing and even corporate agriculture, mas mabilis maka-generate ng trabaho. Di ba? Ang issue lang dyan is ganun uli ba yung ating development paradigm? Extraction and throw away. So that's the biggest question na parang how do you address, no? Kung extractive industries pa rin palagi ang solusyon natin if we want to have an inward looking economy. Wala ka na bang iba, no? So of course BPO is there, no? Yung mga IT driven na technology would also be there, but how big is that employment that can be generated? So yun yung tanong ko kanina, how will we proceed, no? Kung ang nakikitang industries are in this kind of industries which are highly extractive.
So if I can, sorry to cut you, pero before that, we have less than 10 minutes left in the call. If you can keep a short, concise answer and then maybe a longer answer on the chat, and then we can provide, we can go to Kaeta's question. Okay, Karine or CJ?
I have some. Sige, si Sir muna.
CJ, okay. CJ, take it away.
All right. Sir, yes, I agree with what Din Rene said earlier. Pero dun sa question ni Sir Tom, dun sa sectors, yung sa presentation ko kanina, I quoted the work by Chere Cruz and Majo Moirong, and they identified some sectors. Yes, nabanggit yung agriculture. Ang point ng agriculture is that, supporting agriculture is that essential sector ang agriculture. They produce food. Pero dun sa kanilang rationale for selecting sectors such as healthcare, ano yung mga nabanggit ko kanina, healthcare, food manufacturing, agriculture, construction, particularly yung infrastructure, and garments and logistics and so forth. Isang rational dito is the number of jobs that can be created and the extent to which consumption is supported. Household consumption is supported. These are the sectors that support household consumption at the same time create the most number of employment. Hindi naman lahat to extractive. In fact, some of these are services. And then, syempre may manufacturing din. I think extractive lang dito, kagaya ng binanggit nyo, is yung agriculture. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, CJ. A quick rejoinder from Dr. Rene.
Well, maganda ho yung binanggit ni CJ at saka ni kasamang Tom. Actually, looking inward, napakaraming posibilidad po. Number one, yung rebuilding of agriculture. Talagang dapat pwedeng i-rebuild uli ang agriculture. Kaya lang kinakailangan all-out mobilization at saka huwag silang umasa na naman going export-oriented and maging dependent sa ilang mga malalaking korporasyon lang. So you need, again, people's mobilization. Ikalawa, dito sa mga industrial policy, we can have industrial policy region by region. Well, una, mayroon tayong mga industries na dapat buhayin. Na-shock ako na yung dito sa build and then with the Chinese investment, ang laki pala ng ini-import natin semento at bakal. Akala ko with the present government, bubuhayin muli yung steel industry. At yung cement po, na pioneer ang Pilipinas noong 1960s at 1950s sa Asia sa cement production. Bakit hindi natin magawa yan? May build pa tayo. May kailangan ng bakal semento, pala ini-import natin ng malaki. So, dapat yan, yung shipbuilding, yung sa Hanshin, dapat gawin din. At tapos yung mga small boats, napakaraming posibilidad. And then bawat region, magkaroon ng kanyang mga priority products at magkaroon ng malakas na trading between regions. Yun lang, kulang na kulang. Pero yung product ng Mindanao, lumuluksot, tumutuloy sa Maynila. But you see, maraming posibilidad. Kulang. Dapat lang talaga baguhin yung framework ng NEDA. Yung framework kasi ng NEDA is just open up the economy, that foreign investors come in, free flow of capital. You see, hindi pwede yan. Hindi pwede yan sa China. And even Vietnam po, hindi pwede. Do you know that in Vietnam, the biggest bank there is yung Agricultural Bank of Vietnam with 100,000 workers. Naka-farm out yan nationwide. Kaya buhay na buhay yung agriculture dyan because they get the credit support ng kanilang bangko. Tayo wala eh. So marami hong pwedeng gawin.
Thank you, Dr. Rene, no? Reviving yung mga nawalang mga industries at the same time having regions prioritize you and pour in investments sa mga industries nito. Let's have Kaeta Rosales' comment.
Kasi hindi kasalanan ng mahina.
If we can just volume down yung speakers while you're talking and then we'll avoid the feedback. Ayan. Kaeta, we'll go back to you ha, pero we're extending the... hello? Ito po. Hello?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ayan po. Much better.
3 points. Okay. 1, I agree with Rene and CJ on the weakness of sectoral organizing. So COVID situation, we go territorial in support of the sectors addressing basic issues. No? The COVID situation with the workers, we make sure that territories at the level of LGU level. So because we do that, we address the point where LGUs must be strengthened versus ineptness of national government. So territorial strengthening LGUs. Then we address points like agri-workers. LGUs buy agri-workers products and reduce middleman obstacle. Okay? Transport workers can transport from area of produce agri-products to LGU area markets. This kind of situation. So Akbayan should be fully supportive of this kind of thrust. Basic. No? Am I clear?
Yes.
Am I clear? Okay. That's one. No? And I think we should purposely do this for the COVID situation. And when the COVID situation passes, then you have a strengthened worker farmers with local political sectors like Akbayan, Kababaihan, etc. Okay, that's one. Secondly, on mass testing, government is not capable of mass testing. Government does not want to confuse people, they say, because mass testing is not testing the entire population. It is targeting certain populations, like vulnerable sectors, etc. And that is correct when government says that. But government does not have capacity as yet for mass testing. Kasi nahuli, okay? Number two, government confuses people because it is against rapid testing when other doctors say you should use every diagnostic testing that you can in a crisis situation like COVID. Pero gewang-gewang ang government. So that delays. When government tries to do the PCR, health workers get sick. So reduced capacity. That is why Dr. Dairit gives the best prescription. He does not believe that we will go into, argument about first wave, second wave. Stupid. There is no first wave, second wave, third wave. He thinks because first wave means peaking, plateauing, flattening, curving. That cannot happen in the Philippines as long as we have weak capacity. So what we will have would be ambulant waves until the vaccine comes and until we improve. Okay? But that is not to say when we are territorially organized, we address workers' rights to be tested, farmers' rights to be tested. Because you are not just workers alone. You are workers with us. You are workers with women. You are workers with others. And you are workers with business sector. We have to get allies from the business sector. That's number two. Number three, when we do our model, as Rene puts it, do we want a sustainable, inclusive, new normal instead of the new normal from the old normal? Of course, but we cannot do it exclusively. We have to be inclusive. And that involves good people in local government, some people in Congress, maybe in the palace later, but it has to be this kind of inclusivity. This is yet, I'm talking immediate situation. And the immediate situation will take place until the vaccine comes and we are strengthened. Our public health system must be strengthened from national level to provincial, city, down to the barangay. That is territorial work. in support of sectoral. I think we can do it because the situation provides ineptness of government and we must seize the situation as it were. So those are my 3 comments.
Thank you very much, Ka Eta. Any comments po from our panel, no, on weakness of sectoral organizing, a new model, no, where LGUs are strengthened and reducing the middleman obstacle.
Wala na ako may dadagdag kay Kaeta.
Okay. CJ?
Yung isang question dito related dun sa point ni Ma'am Eta about weakness ng sectoral organizing. This is a question from Jeric Cruz. What are your thoughts on prospects for labor organizing? Actually, yung mga labor unions ngayon na kakatuto pa lang gumamit ng Zoom or ng Jitsi. So medyo challenge yan. And may question din dito about sa mga policies na anti-labor na lumalabas. Recently may nilabas yung DOLE na advisory na allowing firms to adjust their wages basta merong may agreement with the workers, no? Ang isang tendency nito baka yung mga firms na walang unions, ang adjustment ng wages ay downward. Ito yung hindi natin kailangan sa panahon na mahina yung aggregate demand. Baka lalong makasama ito sa ekonomiya. Bumabagsak yung remittances. Paano pag bumagsak din yung level of wages ng mga manggagawa? Lalong mawawalan ng aggregate demand, no? Naiwan tayo sa slump. And yun. So marami pong challenges ngayon, lalo na sa organizing. At ang kailangan ng labor ay mag-adjust mas mabilis at makadevelop ng approaches to address these challenges. Ay, isang point pa po pala, yung about sa question ni Ma'am Maylin kanina na ilan yung percentage ng women affected by the lockdown. So ilan yung women sa displaced workers. I quoted the work of Majo Moirong from Ateneo. She came up with another estimate, this time for women. Ang kanyang estimate is about 36% daw ng mga displaced ay women. Majo, dapat gawin mo na rin yung sa youth. Sorry.
Thank you, CJ, and thank you, Kaeta, for your question and comments. Another question here on actually a comment from Center for Migrant Advocacy. Si Ate Angie had to go because she has another webinar. Given the exodus of overseas Filipino workers, 400,000 ang estimate na maapektuhan ng COVID-19 pandemic. The crisis provides opportunity to look what have happened, especially to OFWs who are experiencing unjust labor practices. So is this a good time to call for a new social construct? How can we be engaged? As for OFWs, labor agreements in place were not utilized. So that's from Ate Angie from Center for Migrant Advocacy. Any comments on that, Rene and CJ?
Well, as I mentioned, this is a very unique situation now. We are experiencing ngayon yung possibility of mass return migration. And nakakatakot nga ang implications. Yung sa sinabi kanina ni Tom, yung tungkol sa pagbagsak ng consumption. Karamihan ang consumption natin is remittance-driven. Our economy is consumption-driven, pero malaking portion ng consumption-driven is remittance-driven. Pero ngayon po, may crisis ang mga OFWs globally. Starting muna with the seafaring industry, and sa seafaring, you have the cruise industry na pagkalaki-laki pala, karamihan pala ay mga Pilipino ang nagpapatakbo. So, you have tapos yung sa Middle East nga, halos lahat ng bansa sa Middle East, may crisis ang mga OFWs. And sa Europe, gano'n yun din po. So, ang problem pagbalik dito, ano ang gagawin? At ano may offer natin sa kanila? So, it's a very big problem. And right now, wala po akong maisip na siguro baka maganda i-arrange nyo yung dialogue with Hans Kakdak, what to do, sapagkat this is a very serious problem.
Thank you po, Doc Rene. Ngayon we have a lot of questions on the chat box. I tried to go over, especially doon sa mga hindi pa natin nadaanan in our discussion. The rest, we can email to our resource persons para they can answer after this call. But one question here is that, would you suggest prioritizing sustainable agriculture where communities will be more or less self-reliant at least for food.
Well, actually, matagal na nating proposal yan. Di ba doon sa carb, even doon sa sugar, may proposal doon. Mayroon dapat doon na 10% o 15% ng lupa ay para sa production ng food na kailangan ng community. Ngayon, sinasabi ko nga, this is an opportunity para sa gobyerno, para kay William Dar, na buhayin ng ating agriculture. And yung pong connection, and even yung proposal nila na urban agriculture, soilless agriculture, that is good. But again, you need a development framework. For example, itigil na po yung national land use. Yung national land use program, dapat po i-enact na yan. Hanggang ngayon, wala tayong national land use. Ang gusto ng I will not mention the politician, ang gusto niya ang land use decision daw ng bawat LGU. Di madali nilang kausapin ng mga realtors and developers yun. Ipagbawal ang land banking. Ipagbawal yung magkaroon ng moratorium on land conversion. So, yan po dapat tingnan mabuti. Yung po mga supply chain, iayos. And then nga yung i-repeal muna yung RTL, magkaroon ng hindi naman masama yung mag-export, pero kinakailangan ang balance approach. And then yung trading, yung sinasabing balik probinsya, part ng balik probinsya should be pagpapalagas ng trading. Yung mga organized peasantry, trading with yung mga organized urban poor or rural peri-urban poor. Maraming possibility talaga, but you really need a people-oriented development planning. So, and then, yung sinasabi ni Eta, that's very important, yung LGU. Because the LGUs, kitang-kita naman natin, doon sa mga areas na very visionary and developmental yung LGU leaders, malaki pala nagagawa. So, dapat talaga meron doon maging partners yan. Of course, mahalaga sana everybody in. So, yun po, yung agriculture, it's time to revive it. It's a good opportunity to revive it.
Thank you, Rene. If okay lang kay CJ, I'll proceed to the next question. No? A big gap in the CREATE, itong tax reform program to lower down the corporate tax, proposed CIT cut, is that government is not adopting measures to ensure that firms will spend the windfall in pro-employment directions. How to do so should be discussed by trade unions and its allies. Dagdag ko lang din, no? The Department of Finance had estimates before na this corporate tax cut will provide 1.5 million jobs. Would that figure still holds amid this pandemic? Maybe given that investor confidence appear low in these times?
Palagi ko, para kay CJ yan trade union daw
Yung sa yung sa tax cuts and employment, yung CARS program na sign noong 2015 subsidizes or incentivizes local production of cars. However, ang isang motivation dapat nun is to increase employment in automotive manufacturing sector. Kaya lang parang hindi yun na-realize kasi for some reason, hindi niya na-discourage ang imports ng completely built cars. No? So, hindi ko nakita kung gaano kataas yung tinaas ng output ng local manufacturing, pero the fact na hindi niya na-reduce ang importation of cars and at the same time, hindi siya nag-lead into significant increases in employment. Pag tinignan mo yung employment ng sector, walang significant change In fact, in yung recent years, hindi nga tumaas yung employment. Yung may mga car companies na nag-lay off pa, no? Ito ay kahit na mayroong program na nag-incentivize sa domestic production. So, medyo mahirap tignan or mahirap i-monitor kung papasok tayo sa ganitong program, pero kung hindi naman mamomonitor or hindi ma-ensure na yung activities ng mga companies ay talagang nagke-create ng employment, ay medyo mahirap yun, no? Dapat maglagay ng clause sa incentives or programs na kapag na-meet mo yung ganitong standards, say, a number of jobs generated, ang isang proposal namin is kapag na-observe yung mga labor standards or yung mga firms lang nakapag-observe ng labor standards, ang bigyan ng mga incentives. Kasi dapat in-incentivize mo yung good practices, di ba? So, yun, lesson para sa atin yung CARS program. No, tuloy-tuloy pa rin naman tong CARS program. Nag-shift na sila sa production ng public utility vehicles, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, much, CJ. Thank you very much for everyone for staying throughout, even our 15-minute extension. Again, for questions that we haven't answered live, we will try to send them to our resource persons and then collate them, no, in the official documentation afterwards. We've talked about a whole range of things, not just about mitigating risks for workers when we go back to operations post-lockdown, no? Borrowing the term of Dr. Rene, pero at the same time, yung economic system that we need to reimagine, no? The role of LGUs, how do we also provide an alternative to the different policies that national government is proposing now, corporate tax cuts, balik probinsya program, what would be an inclusive, a more equitable system, one that would radically shift the status quo that we have now in order for us to use this opportunity for a more equitable vision. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. We thank our panelists and speakers as well, Dr. Rene Ofreneo and CJ, and also our participants who provided their questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Maraming salamat.